Today we're going over what held by production means. If you have a lease and someone's told you it's held by production, you're at the right place. Let's back up a little bit. When you own minerals, if you don't want to be responsible for all the drilling costs, you will likely want to lease your minerals to someone who does. In exchange for leasing them that opportunity to drill your minerals, they pay all the costs and you get 20% or 25%, some percentage, which is called a royalty. Okay, that's all great and stuff. You want that to happen. That's how you actually make money. If things aren't producing, you're never gonna make any money from your minerals. You might have heard something called the primary term. The primary term is usually 3 to 5 years, sometimes 2, sometimes more, and that is where certain terms and conditions apply during that time. Usually, and it all depends on your lease, usually that means that during that primary term, they don't have to do anything. That is their time to get all their ducks in a row to get ready to develop whatever they just leased. It takes a long time to get the financing in order, the research done, the models built, the budgets made, get a decent acreage position in place. This takes time. Usually 3 years is the minimum that they'll want in order to guarantee that they have time to put it into their budget and develop your minerals. Once that primary term is over, sometimes there's option to extend that primary term another 2 years or so if they were to pay a certain amount of money to extend it. Now, I am not usually in favor of option periods. I'm not a fan of them. I don't think there's any benefit to the mineral owner. If at the end of 3 years they don't want to extend, they don't have to. They don't have to pay you any money. They can just walk away. If they want to continue and they want to extend, then you're already locked in at a set price. And I just don't like that. If you want 5 years to develop it, just make it a 5-year lease. That's my rant on that. Once they do start drilling and developing, there's usually a clause somewhere in the lease that says if there's production somewhere on the lands, it holds a certain amount of acreage. That can either be a little tiny postage stamp of a plot right around the well, or it could be everything that's pooled together in all depths. It really depends on the language that you signed in your lease. Say you're in the Permian and you have a well that's producing from the Wolf Camp. The Wolf Camp is a reservoir. There's several different layers in the Permian. If your lease allows for it, that Wolf Camp production can hold all the other depths. So the person who owns the lease has rights to continue developing anything else that is any depth or anywhere in that lease. There's the description of the lands that are included in that lease. So they can continue drilling and developing, and they have rights to access any of the oil that's on any of the depths anywhere in that lease. If you have what's called a PEW clause, or vertical or a depth clause, or some type of something that causes that acreage to no longer be held after a certain amount of time, that's when things become not held by production. That one producing well might hold the Wolf Camp's production, so they can continue developing the Wolf Camp, but they can't continue developing anything below it, maybe, or maybe anything above it and below it. Maybe there's acreage designation saying that lease is only held for that little postage stamp that the Railroad Commission determines is around it. Or maybe if it's a horizontal well, maybe it only holds 640 acres. Your lease might be more than that. You want your leases to be for as small of acreage as possible to limit all those things. You want the PEW clauses, you want the acreage limitations. There's also something called a continuous development clause that even if there is production somewhere on the acreage, they still have to keep developing and keep drilling wells every 90 to 180 days in order to continue holding additional acreage, like having the opportunity to drill more wells. And the companies want to have that opportunity. So you want to kind of hold them to the fire to develop it, because they're going to develop the acreage first that has the most conditions to drill. The things that cause them to have to drill, or else they lose that acreage. When they lose the acreage and the opportunity to drill, their balance sheet goes down. Plain and simple. They have to spend more money to pay you to release the acreage if they let it go. So held by production, just to reiterate, because I don't know if I officially said it in a nice compact way, held by production means that there is production that is holding a certain amount of acreage. It doesn't mean it's holding all the lease, but usually it's holding a good amount of it, enough of the lease for that well to continue producing. If your lease is held by production, then almost all of the terms of the lease will continue until the production stops. And then if the production stops, there's usually a amount of time that they have to get that production back up and running, like a shut-in clause or a cessation of production clause, something that says, okay, if the well hasn't made money in a year, or if there's been zero production in a year, make sure you know the difference. If the well has to be making money, or if it just has to be blowing 1 MCF into the pipeline once a year, that's a very big difference. One is technically producing, but it's producing hardly anything. It's producing like a penny of value each year, but it is technically producing that can technically hold a lease. But if your language says it has to be in paying quantities or economic quantities, something where it has to be making money within a certain period of time, then that little puff that it will make once a year, you can't just go on and turn on the well to qualify for that. It actually has to be making money and covering all of its expenses. You want that type of language. The other one's much too vague and people take advantage of it. Trust me. You want some limitation to what is considered production. Like I just said, you want some clarification as to what is production, whether it's paying quantities or not, and then what happens when it stops. Do you have to notify them that you haven't gotten paid? Do they notify you? Do they have a year? Do they have 30 days? What happens when it stops producing? All of those things are very important. Now, all of that said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. This is not legal advice. I'm an engineer. I'm not your engineer. I'm just a random person on the internet. But if you have questions, if you are trying to negotiate a lease, well, first, if you're trying to negotiate a lease, go to a lawyer, go to an attorney, go to an oil and gas attorney that knows the language and can get you modern language into your lease. If you're just looking at lease bonus values, if it's worth going to a lawyer, anything appraisal, that type of related, that's what I do. Trying to get this information out there because the lease is one of the most important things that you negotiate, and it controls all of your future royalties. And then also your lease is very important to me because it tells me how much value you have in your minerals. So it's very important to know what your lease says in order to know what your minerals are worth. But that is the long story of what held by production means. And I'll see you in the next video.